All right, so welcome. I see everybody's here. They already got their iPhone 4S.
I got one this morning.
All right.
At an AT&T store 3 miles away. I walked in and
You didn't sleep out overnight? Cool. So this is about the CAPS server version 2.0, computer audiophile pocket server. So for people who don't know, I'll give you a little background on what it is. And it'll take a very big pocket to fit this in there. So there's a little more to the story. So a couple years ago, I just wanted to, build my own Windows-based server. And, well, I started out, it was kind of a Linux version, then it went to Windows, and I was kind of all over the board. But it started out on a board that was really, really, really small, and it could have fit in a pocket. And I brought it to a colleague's place, and that's where he named it the Pocket Server. And eventually, I changed boards, changed parts, and it got bigger and bigger, but I didn't want to change the name. So, Pocket Server it is. And most people just call it CAPS anyway. So this is version 2 of it. And everybody should know that I don't make a penny off of anything that has to do with this. So you could buy all the parts you want, do whatever, and I don't make a cent. Andrew Gillis from Vortex Box and Small Green Computer is now building these to the exact same specs, because there was a lot of interest from people who wanted to build them but didn't have time. So they said, who's building these? Can I just buy one? So Andrew is now doing it, which is really cool. And I don't get any money from that deal, so I feel comfortable talking it up or whatever without, a conflict of interest. So, I set out to build this, and I gave myself kind of 13 requirements. I wasn't happy with, the big desktop machines you can buy now that are sound like the space shuttle, and so I was kind of unhappy with everything. So here's what my requirements were. I wanted it to be absolutely silent, so no moving parts, no fans, no spinning hard drives, nothing. Capable of great sound, otherwise really was kind of worthless. If I couldn't get great sound, it could, be silent, and I don't care. And it also has to look great. There's a lot of computers out there that just look like hell, to be honest. And let's see, no moving parts, fairly inexpensive. And I say fairly inexpensive because in this hobby, say Andrew's building these for $1,439. And some of us have spent more than that on the sales tax for our cables. So fairly inexpensive product. And no legacy components. That was kind of so if you read the article about this today, you can go out and buy all these parts and make it work. Because we could find some motherboard. There's actually a motherboard out there that has a vacuum tube on it. It's okay, we could have found that, put it in here just for coolness, but you can't buy that. So it's that's no fun. So another requirement was it's got to be easy to operate, either directly with a mouse and keyboard or remotely. So with an iPhone, iPad, or anything like that. It's got to be easy to assemble or install. So assembly or installation by yourself, or by the local computer shop, or your son or daughter, neighborhood kid. It could have been a huge liquid-cooled machine, but that gets pretty hairy and it's not that easy. So I also wanted the small size, low power consumption, low heat. It's got to accept an add-in card for, this one happens to be a USB add-in card, but the previous version had an AES add-in card. And it has to be able to play everything from 1644.1 up to 24.192, all bit perfect. So these requirements originally were difficult to satisfy, but it gets easier and easier every month as more options are available. The hardest thing I would say is settling on a motherboard that's built in here. So I don't know how deep. People want me to go into the individual components, but so I'll touch on them, and then there'll be time for questions and everything too as well. So the motherboard in this machine is made by a company named Jetway, and it's got a couple of things that were really, really cool and critical. To have the low heat, no moving parts, and all that, I wanted one that has the external power supply, so I can just plug this right into the motherboard. And if you're familiar with most computers, desktop size, the power supply is fairly big and has a fan. And there are external fanless power supplies, but they're like half the size of this whole chassis. So finding a motherboard that I could plug an external power supply into was very important. And a motherboard with also that has a PCI slot, because I wanted either a PCI audio card or the PCI USB card I ended up here with. So I ended up on the Jetway, and the CPU here is built into the board, and the heatsink is also like built into the whole package. So if you're familiar with computers, if you get a regular CPU, Intel Core 2 Duo, i7, whatever, you're going to have to put a heatsink on top of that with a spinning fan, and it kind of blows away the requirements. So it takes a lot of research to come up with the exact one that you want. So hopefully you guys can just take a shortcut and decide on this one if you want. There's a couple other models out there, but just a couple. Let's see here. And then the memory in here is very, very standard, and you're kind of limited to what works with the motherboard. So this one holds 4 gigabytes of memory, and that seems to be plenty for this machine running Windows 7. And this is only a 60-watt power supply, so it's fairly low power. The solid-state drive in here isn't one that you see everywhere. It's a store brand from Micro Center, and there's actually a Micro Center not too far from here. I still use OCZ solid-state drives in most of my other computers. There's one in this laptop. But I thought, well, I want to cut down the cost. And if you look at the internal parts for solid-state drives, a lot of them are very similar and use a lot of, like this one uses what's called the SandForce 1222 controller. It's a very popular internal piece for a solid-state drive. So I chose to use the Micro Center brand, 64 gig, fairly cheap. It's $100. So for solid-state drives, that's a pretty good deal. It's 64 gig. So, which kind of brings up, so if you want a lot of space on a solid-state drive, be prepared to spend $1,000 at least. So it gets pretty cost prohibitive, and most people are going to run out of space. So all the storage for this is the operating systems on the local drive, but everything else, it depends on how you connect. A lot of people use a NAS, network attached storage, so it's just Ethernet over their network. And the NAS device is in some other closet making noise where you can't hear it, or they'll have an external USB hard drive. So that's not part of this because everyone kind of likes to do it different, and it cuts the cost down. So this chassis is from Origin. Origin is the company. It's the M10. I absolutely love it. I've used it 2 years in a row now for the CAPS version 1 and CAPS version 2. I just think it's the coolest thing, and it does have a display on the front here, but I've elected not to use it. At first I hooked it up, and I thought I could get some cool information out of it, but for a music server, you really can't. It's not like you can display album art or song titles and all that the way you really want to. So I gutted the internal parts for the LCD, and you can buy the case also without those, and I believe that's what Andrew has done to sell them. He just buys it without the internal LCD parts, which is a smart move. So yeah, I just love this case, and I haven't found one that I like better in probably 2.5 to 3 years. So the case is $320, so it's not cheap. A lot of computer cases, you can get for $50. But I think in terms of build quality and how it looks, it's way better than everything else out there. So the big pieces to this server, what made me most excited about it, was the USB add-in card and the SATA power filter. So this is just a little device that connects to the SATA hard drive, and then you connect the cables into it, and it filters the power. If you look on the Aurality website, Aurality, some of you are probably familiar with them, sells Linux-based music servers. They have measurements that show you exactly what this power filter will do. So it's not snake oil, and it's not just throwing extra money into something. They can show you before and after using solid-state drives or spinning drives what kind of noise this cuts down. So I'm a big fan of it. It's very cool. And then there's this USB PCI card in here, which is really, really cool. It's total dedicated USB ports, and you can turn power on and off to the USB, say a USB DAC. Dedicated USB ports can be really, really important. For example, I have a MacBook Pro 17-inch at home, and you can only plug a USB DAC into one of the USB ports. If you use the other ones, you'll get audio dropouts, and that's because the way USB is designed internally, most of the ports all share what's called a single bus. So all your components are kind of vying for time on that bus ride. And the way Apple does it is the back of the keyboard lights up, and that keyboard is also on the USB bus, which you wouldn't think it's a USB device, but it is. So when the keyboard lights would go dim, you would get an audio dropout if you weren't plugged into the right USB port. So it took forever to figure out that was the problem. But that's one example of how a USB port just isn't a USB port, unfortunately. And most computers are built to the lowest cost. I mean, who can build a motherboard for the cheapest? That's who Dell's going to use. So this specific PCI card with dedicated USB ports works absolutely awesome. I totally, totally love it. And the difference is clearly audible. I say in my article about this that after I got everything hooked up, I went and plugged in the USB DAC, and I really wasn't thinking, but I plugged it into a main USB port just on the motherboard, and I thought, well, this card sucks, Bummer, I was excited. So I went back to the server, and it wasn't plugged in. So I plugged it in to the dedicated card, and everything was wonderful. It really, really makes a big difference. So highly recommended, and I just stumbled upon the card too. So I'm happy that I stumbled upon that. The card isn't cheap. It's when I put this together, it was $339. But again, in this hobby, it's not bad. So you can also power this card with an external power supply. So you can use a battery to power it, which takes it away from this power supply in the noisy computer environment. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do. I didn't go that far. That was a little more tweaky than I wanted to get, and the ease of use requirement kind of wouldn't have been met. So for people that have Firewire DACs, I also spec'd out a Firewire card that was $8. So fairly, a lot cheaper than the USB card, and worked great. A lot of people who use like the Daniel Weiss DAC 202 or DAC 2, that'll work fairly well for them. I don't have a CD-ROM drive in this, but I did spec one out. I just prefer to rip CDs on a different computer. That way I don't have to install the CD ripping software on here, and this is just kind of a playback machine. So it's the way I chose to do it, but there are, I mean, I think $150 you can get a nice slot loading drive, maybe even a Blu-ray drive, because you can now rip Blu-ray audio fairly easily. For the operating system, I chose Windows 7 64-bit Ultimate Edition. And the previous server, I used 32-bit. This server, I went to 64-bit. And it's hard to say there's really a good reason to do it. More than anything, I thought, well, everything's going 64-bit now. I'm going to move to the 64-bit world. And there wasn't any negatives to it. So Windows 7 Ultimate Edition 64-bit. And then for the playback application on here, I use JRiver Media Center. That is by far my favorite Windows-based playback application. For me, it's far ahead of everything in terms of user interface. I know there's a lot of fans of FooBar. For me, I don't like using it. It certainly works great. You can get great audio, but it doesn't fit my style. And then for remote control, if you have an Android device, JRiver has an app called Gizmo, which works very, very well. Somewhat similar to Apple's remote for the iPhone, not as polished, but it works great for remote control. And there's also an app called BitRemote, which controls JRiver Media Center. That's $10, works on the iPhone. I think it works on Android. I think it's web-based, so that satisfies the remote component. So that's kind of the basic overview. I'm not sure what else everybody wants to know. So we can open it up to questions, and then I'm sure those will lead other places. So if anyone has, a question. Yes, Ted.
Chris, have you found whether like a linear power supply or any power supply upgrades is out there? And secondly, is the Ethernet gigabit for your NAS?
Yes, the Ethernet is gigabit for the NAS because I pull almost everything over a NAS device. And then the question about linear power supply usage. I haven't used one on here. Some people have and reported good results. The thing about a computer motherboard is, though, that there's switch mode power supplies other than this that are involved. So you may use an external linear supply and still not get away from all the switch mode noise. But still, I don't think it's going to hurt. I would like to try one, but I just haven't. It would be pretty cool. Yes?
Could you say something about why you chose Windows 7 as opposed to Linux?
Oh, sure, yeah. Question is, why did I use Windows 7 as opposed to a Linux operating system? I love Linux operating systems. They're great. But for Joe Sixpack, they're not great if he wants to build a server. I would buy a server in a heartbeat that runs Linux, that comes kind of canned, prepackaged, because they run fabulous. But for this, it just didn't fit the requirement of ease of use for setup in that. Are you familiar with setting up Linux machines? Okay. It could be rocket science if you're not familiar with it. So the next version 3 server might have something to do with Linux, but that's probably a year and a half away. So don't wait for that one. Here, yeah.
3.0, you might think about maybe using Fedora, just throwing that out there. On the USB board, is it version 2.0 or 3.0?
Yeah, the question is the USB add-in card USB 2 or USB 3? It's a USB 2 card. And that, so USB 2.0 compatible backward with 1.1, and that is different from if you hear people talk about Class 2 USB audio. Very different things. So this will support Class 2 USB audio, which is required for up to 24.192, playback over USB. So, yes?
Onboard video on the motherboard?
Onboard video on the motherboard is just VGA. That was probably the last concern I had building it. But I know since I've built it, a lot of people have wanted HDMI to do a little bit of video. I think this thing is powerful enough to do some video, but this is just VGA.
And what about using like a Lynx L22 card in there so you got both digital and, if you wanted, analog audio out rather than just a USB port?
Yeah, the Lynx cards will work. I used an AES-16 for the previous build. But the one thing that you have to do with the Lynx card, this will only fit a half height PCI card, so half as tall. So for the Lynx cards, you need what's called a PCI riser. That goes up and then sideways, so the PCI card goes over the heatsink sideways like this, and then the top fits on. It may be difficult because this heatsink is tall. So I haven't tried it, but definitely a possibility. Yeah, Lynx makes very good cards. Yes?
For those of us who are just starting out, could you verbally diagram the implementation? We've got a computer, the NAS, and the DAC. This thing sits in the middle. And how is it connected?
Sure. So yeah, so the NAS device, a box with a bunch of disks in it. All your music is stored there. Plugs into your home network via Ethernet cable, and this also plugs into your home network via Ethernet cable. So almost everybody here has a router at home. If you have wireless internet at home, you probably have a router. So this will connect to that router via Ethernet. A NAS will connect to the router via Ethernet. And then the DAC will connect to this computer via USB. And you'll pull the audio from the NAS, and the audio will go out via USB. It's very simple. I mean, everything behind the scenes is done for you, really. You don't really have to know much about it. But that's kind of how it works. Your router will kind of be the central point between the NAS and this computer. Does that touch on a little bit, or do you have anything more specific? Because I'm sure if you have the question, so do other people.
Just one more. You've got an iPhone or whatever and a remote app. Does that talk to the server?
Okay, the remote application talks to your wireless network. So your wireless router has the Ethernet coming into it from this and the NAS, and then this will talk to that wireless router and then go out through Ethernet to talk to this, because this doesn't have wireless built in. Here.
If I wanted to not use Ethernet for a NAS to store my music, I would have an external drive attached via USB.
I would, if you use a USB DAC, I would use an eSATA external drive for this. This does have an eSATA port, which is really, really cool. So even though the USB bus is totally separate for the USB DAC here, using USB and USB can cause problems. So yeah, if you don't have a NAS, you can use an external drive. I would use eSATA.
You still need Ethernet in for the remote store.
Yeah, you do. You can do weird things like set up this as a wireless access point with a wireless dongle and stuff like that, but I wouldn't do it that way. I would just do Ethernet.
And then just real quick, eSATA versus Ethernet, any advantages of one versus the other?
eSATA is going to be really, really fast, and because it's just like local, it's just like being an internal hard drive, and it's always there. You don't have to worry about a network problem, although they're very minimal. So, but you will be limited to the size of your eSATA external drive. So if you have a 2 terabyte external eSATA drive now and you outgrow that, you have to get a different one copied over, versus if you have a NAS drive capable of holding 5 2 terabyte hard drives or something, you can just add another drive. That's kind of how that works. So, and then a NAS drive can be accessible from anywhere else in your house. So if you're on your laptop upstairs, you can get the same music. So who's next? Yes?
Why did you choose Windows 7 Ultimate? Why not Windows 7 Home?
That's a good question, and it's been asked a few times. I went for the one that had absolutely everything, because I didn't want to have to go, oh shoot, I need that option, and now I need to go install an upgrade. And the price difference was very, very minimal. So I just thought, let's go with Ultimate, and who knows, if it turns out I need something on there, I have it. I don't have to ever think about it again.
But today, you haven't found.
No, I haven't found any. I mean, you could install the very minimum version of Windows and get by totally fine. I just didn't want to have to think about it. So, yep, good question. Yes?
My interest is in getting the best USB sound out of these devices, and I see you spent a lot of time finding that switchable power on the USB card. Now that from what you've said, sounds significantly better than the motherboard's USB card, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you compared, so this is an anal-accepted question, but I'll ask it anyway. Have you compared that USB card with, say, a USB SPDIF converter, like a battery-mounted high-phase recorded video or a Stello?
Have I done that? The question is, have I compared this going USB out from this card into the USB DAC versus using USB to SPDIF converter?
The reason I ask is because a couple of those SPDIF converters, like the battery-mounted high-phase recorded video especially, have a lot of work in cleaning up the power supply and not regenerating it, but like when you can isolate it, and they're very good for that. I mean, the change over standard USB is just phenomenal, it's dramatic, and I wondered where that sort of sat.
Sure. I don't think I've directly compared it, but my guess would be that if you used this dedicated USB out into one of those devices, it would improve it.
But you could spend $300 on that, or you could spend say, $400 on a modern high-phase.
Or $700 on both.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, in this hobby, it's peanuts, but yeah, I get it. It's not free.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if I were building this, I'd probably ditch that USB card and use a converter, because I guess it would be better than that. I don't know.
Okay. Pretty soon, I'm going to have the new Berkeley Audio Design Alpha USB in for review. So that's USB to AES or SPDIF converter, and I'm going to use this built-in USB card.
Yeah, right.
I'll compare it versus the onboard USB just for my own knowledge, but I think this USB card will be an improvement.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I think it's that good.
Really?
Yeah, I really love it. It's a cool deal. So yes.
Did you have to go through and kill a bunch of processes in Windows?
I certainly did. I configured Windows. Yeah, if you just install Windows and kind of leave it default, you have a lot of extra stuff running. So on my site, I have a PDF document that details all of the services that are running, whether they're manual, automatic, or disabled. And this is after I went in and changed them from starting up automatic and manual and all that. So there's quite a few. I mean, the list is really, really long. The ones that are started is not very long.
And was it your sense that made a difference in the audible performance?
I like to think so, but I don't know if I could sit there and go, okay, turn this service on, let me listen, turn that one off.
But you felt better anyway.
I certainly did. I felt a lot better, and it cut down on the amount of memory that was in use and all that kind of stuff. If anything, it probably would stop a dropout from happening if something else was going on, but I certainly won't say, the bass was a lot tighter with this service off. If other people have noticed that, excellent, cool. I just haven't. I think there's probably bigger fish to fry. So, yes?
Are there higher wattage external power supplies available to support like a high-end HDMI card?
Yes, there are. This was the lowest power supply model, but they probably, I know there's an 80, maybe they go up to 100 or 120 or something, but yeah. And it's pretty standard, so I think you could just get, one with comparable specs, and it'll work.
And follow-up question, does the motherboard support PCI 16?
PCI, are you thinking PCI X16? Or PCIe? Oh, it's only PCI. Yeah.
So probably wouldn't work with most of those videos.
It would be tough to find one. It may be possible. I wouldn't rule it out. Next. Ted.
The SATA filter you have on that, does that also affect the eSATA out?
No. And I don't think you could make it affect that. Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that. Yeah, if you use an eSATA external hard drive, you won't be able to use this SATA filter, but you'll still need an internal hard drive to run your operating system off, so you'll be able to use this. Yes?
Motherboard of J1.
It is, let me pull up the exact model here. Motherboard, it is the NF96FL-525-LF. And it's all on my site with links to purchase it from either, let's see, who's my favorite place to get it? Logic Supply is where I get a lot of this stuff for this type of thing. It's $170 right now out there. So it's got a dual core Atom processor, and it's pretty powerful for being wimpy, if that sounds right. Kind of like jumbo shrimp. So yes.
If you're going A6 with USB out, packetized data, is USB card, do you think, still important? I know it could prevent dropouts, but in terms of sound quality?
Good question, and I have an example for that. I do think it's still important. I recently reviewed the Meitner DAC MA1, and that's got async USB in. And using my Mac Pro, which is the big desktop, the USB did not sound very good. And so I switched to this for USB, and it sounded significantly better. And after talking with Meitner, it turns out the USB input is not galvanically isolated. So there's a lot of junk coming from the Mac Pro. And I don't know, the difference. I mean, obviously the power supply and the low power and everything here probably helped too. But I do know that this was a significant step up. I could probably pull the card or try the onboard and go down that path further. But
how would you describe the difference in terms of sound? Like what changed the sound?
Oh, the sound of the DAC with my Mac Pro was very, very dead. It was very lackluster, and it was disappointing. But then when I put this in, everything really came to life. It was very vivid. I think I go into detail about kind of the differences on the review. So it was kind of an eye-opener as to how much galvanic isolation can make, or the design of the USB input. Yes?
So would this question apply if we were using a DAC that was galvanically isolated? Then would the UPS implementation matter less?
Don't know. Yeah, I really don't. Trying to think of the DACs I have, if they are, but I'll have to test it. Yeah, I don't know. It certainly won't hurt, but it's $300 and some you could save if you didn't have to. Yes.
Another digital audio 101 question. So, all your music stored on the NAS, for example, you put that into a library and you select all those using the JRiver Media Center software.
Yep.
And then how do you load all that software on your server?
Okay. I think I get where you're going with that. For setup, originally I just connected a keyboard and mouse and monitor to this. But now when I use it regularly, it's connected via Ethernet, and I connect to it using like remote desktop. And so it's like I'm sitting on there to do things in terms of loading software. But also, and correct me if I'm going wrong here, but so if all my music is on the NAS drive shows up in Windows as just another drive letter, say M for music, just like your C drive. It'll be the M drive. And then within JRiver, you just tell it, oh, here's where my library is. It's loaded on the M drive. And then it goes out and scans all your music, and it shows up in your library. So you click on the album art. You don't have to know anything about a NAS, file structure, or anything like that. So in a way, most people are familiar with iTunes and how all the music looks in there. So it would be very similar. And I also use a NAS for iTunes on my Mac as well. So does that cover kind of what you wanted? Okay.
You may need a CD player to load Windows if you're going to build it yourself.
Yes. Originally to install this, I believe I used a CD player, or a CD drive. I don't think I was able to do it via USB stick or something like that. So for the install, I just had one hanging around. Yes?
The question about the mounted Mac versus Windows, do you use the same NAS for both?
Yes. The question is, do I use the same NAS drive for Windows and Mac? Yes, I do.
And how is that all working together?
Works totally fine. 100%. Yep, no problems. Yes?
Have you noticed if anything else in the music chain affects the sounds? For instance, different types of routers, different switches, different network cables?
Affect the sound in terms of, I'll say, usually it's very easily noticeable in terms of dropouts. If stuff, the question is about, do routers or network cables or anything like that affect the sound? And I will say it's very noticeable with a dropout. I have yet to notice a difference other than, if it either works or it doesn't. So to me, again, there's bigger fish to fry. But certainly an interesting experiment. Yes?
If you're concerned about ultimate audiophile quality, you can always just grab it from the NAS and bring it to your local drive and play it and then send it back.
Yes, you certainly can. And in JRiver, you can use the option to play back from memory. So it'll load the track into memory before it starts to play it, if that's a concern. Yes?
You just stated that you use the remote desktop function of Windows 7.
Mm-hmm.
You have to at least be at Windows 7 professional version in order to use remote desktop.
Good point.
The home version does not work.
Good point. Yeah, he said if you want to use remote desktop to get access over Ethernet, you need to be at the Windows 7 professional version. So if you are at the home version, there's a number of other third-party applications that will do something very similar, like TeamViewer. So just kind of an FYI. But yeah, very good point. Way in the back.
Using the, you mentioned the AES EBU interface to USB. Using that interface, does it also have optical input?
It depends. You mean like using an external USB to AES interface? The one that I was talking about, the Berkeley Audio Design Alpha USB, does not. But I'm sure there are several. There's a new SOTM one that the Reality guys have in the room with all the music in there. That's USB to, I know it's got AES. I saw a coax on there. There may have been optical as well.
I think M2 Tech Evo has one.
Okay, yeah, M2 Tech Evo. So they're definitely out there. Questions? Yes?
It might be anathema, but if I wanted to play like mode through that, putting a browser on there would impact sound quality poorly, or is that doable?
Interesting question. I know they came out with a desktop app now. Yeah, I'm using it on my Mac, and it's cool. It's certainly sound quality-wise, it is what it is, but the access to music is awesome. So I guess it's going to sound as best as you can make it using something like this. I think it's all 320K MP3, but yeah, I absolutely love that service. It's awesome.
Would you just use remote desktops and phones to play, or?
I probably would. I would probably connect to it via remote desktop and then just run it from there. Run either the web interface, the new beta interface. Are you talking?
You don't use the Chrome now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. I would just remote desktop to it and run it from there. Although the new desktop client does have Apple AirPlay embedded, if that would help somehow. But
do you think having a browser live on there would affect sound quality?
Probably not. No. I install Google Chrome as the web browser on there. And there's no antivirus, no anti-malware, anything loaded on this thing. So be cautious. But those apps are an absolute nightmare if you just want something to play back for music. Which kind of also brings me to the point of just use it for music playback. Don't load pictures on it and do email and Excel spreadsheets. It just leads to problems down the road. just from experience and a lot of people emailing saying they're using the general house computer and why doesn't this work or why doesn't that work. A dedicated computer is much better. So, questions? Yes?
Have you had occasion to use the filter for the fan? I know it doesn't have a fan, but around people have the fan filter as well?
Yeah, the question, there's like the SATA filter, there's a filter for fans. I haven't used it yet, but I've heard good things about it. Fans, yeah, I'm very anti-fans. But if you have one, yeah, I would try the filter. I don't think it's very expensive. Certainly can't hurt. Anyone else? Questions?
They have their own box. Do you listen to theirs?
The Aurality box? Oh, definitely, yes. It's very good. Aurality server, the PK90, is based on Linux. So you plug it in, plug in a hard drive, and have remote control app feel like your iPhone. Works very, very well. Mm-hmm. Yes?
When you assembled the unit, did you have to make any special provisions for grounding?
No. Nope. Didn't do anything for grounding. Questions? Related, unrelated? Yes?
USB cables.
USB cables, do they make a difference? I haven't heard them all, so I don't know. Yes?
Chris, have you played around with the Thunderbolt drives any on your Mac stuff?
The question is about Thunderbolt drives. I haven't used them yet, but I'm very interested. Thunderbolt has a ton of potential. It's really, really cool. So yeah, I can't wait to get into the Thunderbolt stuff.
Thunderbolt drives already out. A friend of mine's experimenting with the system. The file transfer speed is breathtaking.
Yeah, it's got to be really, really fast. A lot of questions come up about when are we going to see Thunderbolt DACs. I don't know, probably in a couple months from humongous manufacturers, but from high-end audio manufacturers, gosh, who knows? There's really not a huge need for it because you can do multi-channel 24/192 over USB. So, I mean, you don't even need USB 3. I guess one of the only reasons I can think of to do it would just be a different implementation of the protocols and how they work. So, would be cool though. Coolness factor is always there. Questions, related, unrelated? Yes?
One more async related question for USB. Do you think it would be better to have two computers in the room with the stereo? One is the dedicated music server, and the other might be a laptop that you're using as screen sharing to control your music. That would put out a lot of noise, I would assume, in your area of the audio system. Or it would be better to go out USB async directly from the laptop that you're using to control your music.
I'm not sure I follow you.
Well, the question is that if you're using a laptop to control your music, playlist and iTunes.
Okay, so the audio is going out, or you're just...
Audio is going out, async USB.
Okay.
What's the benefit of having a second computer in the room that would serve as a music server in addition to that laptop? Or would they cancel each other out?
I think I get it. I think convenience, maybe, if I get where you're going. Like, I'll sometimes have this connected USB to a USB DAC, and then I'll have my laptop in my lap, and I'll remote control to it to control it, instead of run a USB cable from this laptop, into a USB DAC. Is that kind of...
Yeah, so you would still advocate a dedicated music server that's stripped down.
Yeah, definitely.
Just for convenience? What about sound quality?
Well, I mean, if they're both equal, I'm saying, I kind of thought that's where he was going. So in terms of sound quality, yeah, I mean, if they're not both equal, I definitely I want this one connected to the audio system and anything else not connected. Next. Yes?
Kind of Audio 101. It seems like there's maybe two main ways of going about this. One is either sending the music out as data, like USB, versus, let's say, SPDIF.
Okay.
So with SPDIF, it seems like jitter seems to matter. Your SPDIF out seems to have, if there's a decent amount of jitter on it, it seems like the DACs sometimes don't do as well. With USB, it seems like the DACs are going to always buffer and reclock. And so it seems like you're kind of got two different schools of thought and problems. Do you have any preferences or any thoughts on the trade-offs? And
I don't have any preferences. I have some thoughts, but that's kind of a question, if you ask 5 engineers that question, you'll get at least 10 answers. It all depends on the implementation. Some USB DACs sound a lot worse than a Toslink DAC. So, yeah, but some of the issues, with the embedded clock at an SPDIF stream or, an async USB just coming out as data, there's some, theoretically, async USB should be unbeatable. But some things are better, and it all depends on which async USB DAC and the software. Does it require special software? Does it not? So, yeah, I wish it was easy. It was just a checkbox. Async, you're done. It's not.
So you came across a DAC that performed better on split it into that always async.
Yeah, and some manufacturers will suggest you use the Toslink input on their DAC instead of USB. It all depends. One thing that is really cool, you do get total isolation when you do use Toslink between the computer and the audio system. So it really depends. Questions?
Have you found a micro mini with Toslink in the back?
I think a lot of them do. Really? Maybe they don't then, huh? I think finding the exact combination of PCI card, external power supply, and Toslink on the back would be tough. There may be, there may be an SPDIF header on the motherboard, which you can create your own cable for, but that gets it out of the requirement of being easy for a lot of people, including myself. Yes?
I have one question about if you ever compare this with, let's say, an existing Mac Mini in terms of performance.
So, okay.
A lot of people use the Mac.
Yeah, question is this versus a Mac Mini, and it's apples and oranges, although they do both output music. They're completely different. They do sound different, and it's kind of, I always recommend whatever you're comfortable with, use. A lot of people are comfortable with PCs and don't want to touch Macs. So they'll say, go this route. And if you're the other way, you like Mac and not a PC, don't even think about this. But they're both capable of awesome sound. They do sound different.
I just imagine, for example, if you install Windows 7 on the Mac, how would that compare? Just the hardware and it's the same.
Oh, okay. So if I install Windows 7 on the Mac, I haven't done it on a Mac Mini. To compare that, I have Windows 7 on my Mac Pro, the big one, and that didn't sound well, but I was using the USB from that story earlier. So I don't know. I know that you won't have the dedicated USB card. So, yes?
Say a few words of how, you just said that a Mac Mini and this device will sound different, sort of categorically. Could you say a couple of descriptive things about the difference?
In the systems that I've listened to them in, good question. I probably couldn't give you exact specifics, but there is a different sound, different character to the sound. There's, like, for example, in JRiver, which is loaded on this machine, you can use different output modes like Wasapi, kernel streaming, or ASIO, versus the Mac, which has its own core audio, or you're using Amara or Channel D's Pure Music. So there's definitely a difference, but I can't say overall, here's what you're going to hear on a Mac versus this. I really don't know. Yes?
Just a question. If you have all the parts in front of you and the software, about how long does it take to build and then install the software and configure it, just roughly?
If you have all the parts, how long does it take to put this together and install the software? The software will take you longer to install than to physically put this together. It's incredibly simple. One of the things that makes it easy is that the CPU is on the board already. You don't have to get CPU cooling paste and all that kind of crap. So depending on how familiar you are with putting computers together, I mean, if you're experienced at doing it, you could have this together in a half an hour physically, and then installing the software is what's going to take a while to load Windows. But if you fumble your way through it, probably a couple hours. You know, if you have some uncertainties, should I do this or should I do that? And a couple of people have posted on the CAPS V2 article, I'm stuck, I'm at this point, how does this pin go in? So then you got to wait for somebody to respond. But the answers are out there, and it's really not difficult. And a lot of people, I was kind of surprised, they really got a lot of satisfaction out of building it themselves, and really they totally got into it. Because initially I thought, well, us audiophiles aren't going to want to build a computer. But a lot of people have said, that's the first computer I've ever built or even thought about building, and it was really fun. And it's a satisfying experience to get really, really good sound out of something like that. So if you're interested, go for it. And, you know, you buy the parts, you figure out you can't do it, just go to the Geek Squad and say, here's what I want to do. Can you do it? They'll do it. It's no biggie. Yes?
One question about moving parts. Why don't move parts? Like, for example?
Sure. Moving parts, because they're bound to fail. They make noise. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about whether that a spinning hard drive is electrically a lot more noisy than a solid-state drive, but I don't know that the facts are there to back it up. I think it goes both ways depending on which spinning drive you're using and which solid-state drive you're using. So that's kind of where I'm at. Moving parts, if I can eliminate them, I do.
Well, I was just thinking that the large hard drive have all the things you said.
Yeah, you could probably fit a regular 3.5-inch hard drive in here. I think, are they up to 4 terabytes now? I mean, you could probably put a 4 terabyte drive in there. The heat would definitely increase big time. I believe all the new M10 cases do have the perforations on the top, but if you get an old one, I don't think it does. So that may be a minor heat issue. But without fans, I've never had a heat problem in this at all. So some people have, and it may have something to do with configuring the BIOS. Not positive, but I just know I don't have problems with heat. I have tried different memory in here as well. Hasn't made any difference, but some of it looks cooler with nice heat sinks. Yes? When you boot up a computer, you know, you see the screen that's just got like text, and a lot of times it will say hit F10 to enter setup. There you can set up things like what do you want the boot drive to be, or do you want to disable some of the ports on the back? It's kind of very low-level hardware. So if you disable, say, a parallel port, the operating system won't even know that it's there. Just things like that. And you can enable, like you can speed up the processor and stuff like that. So you don't really have to mess with it. It's just an added tweak. Of course, I went in there and played around with it and got stuck and had to reset to defaults a few times, but that's all part of it, you know. Yeah, you know, so. Yes?
Would you say that a standard PC laptop, compared to that server, that one of the biggest differences is that dedicated USB?
Yeah. That is that's probably the biggest difference is the dedicated USB card. I was just at an event a couple weeks ago, and somebody had a really, really cheap like netbook, and another person had a very, very expensive Sony Vaio laptop. And the Vaio laptop had a lot of problems with the USB ports, and this really cheap thing seemed to work great. So it's really all over the board with the laptops or even desktops. And I mean, this card, you can kind of guarantee that the USB is going to work as best it can. So yeah, that is a big difference.
Are there any laptops that have a dedicated card,
No.
or can that be retrofitted to a PC?
What you can do now, I mean, you could do it in the past, but it was a little awkward. If you have a laptop with Thunderbolt, you can get an external housing for PCI card. So you could put that in there and connect it Thunderbolt. I mean, it's not an elegant solution. It can be done.
What about the card bus?
Yeah, there is card bus slot, like express cards, that will, I think that might be an interesting solution to get, if your laptop has an express card slot, to do express card to a dedicated USB.
A lot of laptop express card slot still connects through the USB interface.
Does it really? Ooh, bummer. The Mac ones might go straight PCIe. I'm not sure, but good point. Yeah, because if it goes to the USB bus, then you're not gaining anything. It's just an added layer. I think a company called Sonnet makes some very, very nice ones. So, just a thought. We have 4 minutes. We could, we can end it here, and then people can come up and take a look at it if they want, or because we probably got to be out right at the end. Yeah, soon if the next group's coming in. Yeah.
What's your website?
Yeah, it's computeraudiophile.com, or there's a quick way, c-a.fm, and that'll redirect you. c-a.fm. That'll get you there. Sure. Where's the hard drive located on this? It is mounted on the side, right back in there. So without the card, you can easily see it and install it. So I'll leave this up here and until we get kicked out, you can come and look at it. And if anybody's interested in the card for the person who will build these and sell them, I have the cards up here. Thanks. Thanks.